Somewhere in the Andromeda spiral, in a beige office building that looked remarkably like every other beige office building in the known universe, Quibblethorpe Snodgrass was having what would later be described by historians as the galactic equivalent of finding out you've been using the wrong end of a toilet brush for 47 years. The day had started normally enough. Quibblethorpe, a mid-level bureaucrat of the Zephyrian species who looked like walking asparagus with anxiety disorders, had been cataloguing Class 15 Deathworld planets. These were the really nasty ones, the kind where even the bacteria had lawyers and the gravity filed restraining orders against visitors. "Let's see," he muttered, adjusting his 17 pairs of reading glasses. "Planet Skullcrusher Prime, do not approach. Planet Bloodfeast Omega, do not approach. Planet..." Wait a minute. His eye stalks twitched violently. What the hell is this? There, buried in subsection 47 of Appendix 92, was an entry that made his chlorophyll run cold. Planet Earth, Sol System, Class 15, Deathworld, do not approach. Last updated, never. Lun. But here's the thing that made Quibblethorpe's breakfast of fermented plankton come rushing back up his esophageal tubes. According to the Galactic Census Bureau, Earth had 7 billion inhabitants. "Impossible!" he shrieked, his voice reaching frequencies that made nearby filing cabinets whimper. "Nothing survives on Class 15 Deathworlds. That's the whole point of marking them do not approach." He frantically pulled up the classification criteria. Class 15. Deathworlds were defined as planets where the atmosphere was actively trying to kill you. The weather had a personal vendetta against all life forms. The local fauna considered visitors a light snack. The gravitational field played pranks on your internal organs. And the indigenous microbes held annual "Let's Dissolve the Visitors" festivals. Earth checked every single box. Its atmosphere contained 21% oxygen, a gas so violently reactive that most civilized species used it only for controlled explosions. The weather included phenomena called hurricanes, tornadoes, and something absolutely terrifying called Australian summer. The fauna included creatures called hippos, bears, and honey badgers, the last one being so feared that even galactic marines crossed themselves when its name was mentioned. But the 7 billion inhabitants, that was the part that made Quibblethorpe question his sanity, his career choice, and whether he'd accidentally ingested hallucinogenic space mold again. He called his supervisor, Bingles Nort Whifflebottom, a crystalline entity who resembled a walking chandelier with a PhD in pessimism. "Sir," Quibblethorpe stammered, "we have a situation." "Define situation," Binglesnort replied, his crystal facets tinkling ominously. "Well, remember how we've been marking certain planets as do not approach for the last 40,000 years? Yes, excellent policy. Keeps the casualty reports manageable. Right, well, one of our Class 15 Deathworlds appears to have 7 billion sentient inhabitants who've been living there this entire time." The silence that followed was so profound that several nearby star systems paused their rotation to listen. Finally, Binglesnort spoke. "Quibblethorpe, my dear fellow, I want you to listen very carefully. Are you telling me that somewhere in this universe there's a planet so deadly that we classified it as absolutely lethal to all known life forms, and there are 7 billion creatures living on it who apparently never got the memo?" That's exactly what I'm saying, sir. And these creatures, they're alive. Not only alive, sir, but according to the preliminary scans, they appear to be thriving. They've built cities, developed technology, and... Quibblethorpe's voice cracked. "They play sports in weather that would liquefy a Gatronvian." Binglesnort's crystalline form began to dim, which was never a good sign. When a crystalline entity started losing luminosity, it usually meant someone was about to get fired, or vaporized, or both. "Quibblethorpe," he said slowly, "do you realize what this means? That our classification system has a tiny flaw?" "A tiny flaw?" We've potentially ignored an entire civilization of creatures who live on a planet that, according to our best scientists, should have killed them all before they learned to make fire. These beings are either the most resilient life forms in the universe, or, he paused dramatically, our entire understanding of what constitutes a death world is completely wrong. At that moment, every bureaucrat within a 50-light-year radius felt a disturbance in the force of paperwork. Forms were about to be filed, committees were about to be formed, and somewhere in the depths of space, a small blue planet continued spinning peacefully, completely unaware that it had just broken the universe's most fundamental safety regulations. Within 17 minutes of Quibblethorpe's discovery, the Emergency Committee of Universal Panic had been assembled. This was a collection of beings so diverse that their meetings required 17 different atmospheric settings and a translator who spoke 400 languages, including 3 forms of interpretive dance. The committee chair was Grimbleshanks Puddingworth, a gelatinous cube, who had achieved the impossible feat of being boring in 3 dimensions simultaneously. He oozed into the conference chamber, leaving a trail of bureaucratic slime that somehow smelled like disappointment and old paperwork. "Ladies, gentlemen, and non-binary energy beings," Grimbleshanks announced, his voice carrying all the excitement of a tax audit, "we are here to discuss what our preliminary reports are calling the Earth situation." Present were representatives from 12 major galactic civilizations, including the notoriously paranoid beetle brains of Rigel 7, who wore protective suits even to their own birthday parties, and the overly cautious tremble knees from the outer spiral, who considered crossing the street an extreme sport. Quibblethorpe stood before this assembly of the galaxy's most safety-conscious beings, clutching his report like a life-preserver in an ocean of impending doom. "The facts are these," he began, his voice quavering like a leaf in a hurricane. "Earth was classified as a Class 15 death world approximately 43,712 years ago by surveyor Blinkspot McGillicuddy, who took one look at the preliminary scans and immediately requested a transfer to mapping black holes, which he described as considerably safer." The assembly murmured nervously. Several trembled knees began hyperventilating, which was particularly impressive since they didn't actually have lungs. The classification was based on atmospheric composition, weather patterns, geological instability, and something McGillicuddy noted as the presence of creatures that appear to have been designed by a sadistic deity with anger management issues. Florbington Noodlebrain, the beetle brain representative, raised a trembling appendage. "Surely you don't mean to tell us that sentient beings are voluntarily living in such conditions?" "Not only living," Quibblethorpe replied, consulting his notes with the expression of someone delivering a terminal diagnosis, "but they appear to have developed what they call civilization. They've built structures that reach into their toxic atmosphere, develop transportation methods that regularly exceed safe velocity limits, and—" He paused for effect. "They engage in recreational activities that involve deliberately exposing themselves to their planet's hazards." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of several committee members fainting, which in the case of energy beings created a rather spectacular light show. Grimbleshanks oozed closer to the projection screen. "Show us the evidence." Quibblethorpe activated the holographic display, and images of Earth appeared before the horrified assembly. There were humans surfing on walls of water that could crush a Rhinoxian battlecruiser, skiing down mountains in weather that would freeze methane, and doing something absolutely insane called bungee jumping. "Dear cosmic forces!" shrieked Tiddlywinks Bampasot, a representative of the nervous Nellies of Proxima Beta. "They're throwing themselves off perfectly safe elevated surfaces for fun." "This is just the beginning," Quibblethorpe continued mercilessly. "They also consume liquids that would dissolve most known metals, ingest plant matter that contains compounds we use as industrial solvents, and they've developed competitive activities that involve deliberately colliding with each other at high speeds. The committee erupted into chaos. Half the members were demanding immediate evacuation protocols, while the other half were questioning whether these humans were actually some form of previously unknown mechanical construct designed to survive in impossible conditions. Grimbleshanks slammed his pseudopod on the table, creating a wet slapping sound that somehow commanded attention. Order. The question before us is simple. How do we handle a species that has been thriving on a planet we classified as uninhabitable for 40,000 years? Maybe, suggested Wobblethought Gigglesnort from the overly optimistic order of Omicron, we made a teensy-weensy mistake in our classification. The committee stared at him as if he'd suggested that black holes might make excellent vacation destinations. Impossible, declared Grimbleshanks. The Galactic Survey Department has never made an error. Our safety record is impeccable. Except, Quibblethorpe said quietly, for that time we classified a nursery planet as a combat zone, or when we marked a luxury resort as a toxic waste dump, or the incident with planet Fluffykins being labelled as a military installation. Grimbleshanks's gelatinous form began to quiver with what might have been rage, embarrassment, or possibly indigestion. Those were administrative anomalies. This is different. This is... He trailed off as the true magnitude of the situation hit him like a Gortharian freight hauler traveling at maximum warp. If Earth wasn't actually a death world, if these humans were just living normal lives on what they considered a perfectly habitable planet, then everything the Galactic Survey Department thought they knew about planetary classification was wrong, which brought them to Protocol 47B, more commonly known in bureaucratic circles as the "oh shit" protocol. This particular protocol had been designed by committee, revised by subcommittee, and approved by a sub-subcommittee that had been formed specifically to approve protocols designed by the original committee. It was, in short, a masterpiece of administrative incompetence wrapped in official language and tied with red tape. The protocol required the immediate dispatch of what the manual cheerfully called an expendable diplomatic survey team. The word expendable appeared in the manual 47 times, which should have been everyone's first clue about the mission's expected survival rate. Captain Binksworth Flumpernickel had drawn the short straw, metaphorically speaking. In reality, he'd drawn the short tentacle, which was how the squishoid species determined unpleasant assignments. Squishoids looked like octopi who'd been hit by a shrink ray and given middle management positions, which explained their generally pessimistic outlook on life. "Let me understand this correctly," Flumpernickel said, reviewing his orders with the expression of someone who'd just been asked to tap dance through a minefield. "You want me to take a ship to a planet that's been marked as certain death for 40,000 years, make contact with whatever impossible creatures are living there, and file a report?" "That's the general idea," confirmed Grimbleshanks, who had developed the annoying habit of leaving slime trails wherever his anxiety peaked. "Oh, and try not to die immediately. The paperwork for posthumous mission reports is dreadful." Flumpernickel's crew consisted of the finest examples of expendable personnel the galaxy had to offer. There was Lieutenant Snorkelwhiff Bumblebottom, a crystalline being who specialized in first contact protocols and had the nervous habit of refracting light into anxiety-inducing patterns. Navigator Plimptonshire Wobbleguts, from the famously cowardly Jellybeans of Sector 9, whose species had evolved transparent skin specifically so they could see their own organs preparing to shut down from fear. And finally, Communications Officer Tiddlybinks Snufflebottom, a member of the chattering class of Beetlejuice 4, who could speak 17 languages but couldn't stop talking in any of them. "Right then," Flumpernickel announced to his crew as they boarded their ship, the aptly named Probably Doomed. "Our mission is simple. Fly to the most dangerous planet in known space. Land safely on a world that allegedly kills everything that approaches it. Make friends with creatures who somehow survive in conditions that would liquefy our internal organs, and return with a comprehensive cultural exchange report. "Is there a plan B?" squeaked Wobbleguts, his transparent stomach visibly churning with terror. "Plan B is to die quickly and hope someone finds our ship's black box before it gets dissolved by whatever passes for rain on that nightmare world." The journey to Earth took 3 standard galactic weeks, during which the crew's morale plummeted to levels previously thought impossible. Tiddlywinks hadn't stopped talking since they'd left dock, providing a running commentary on every possible way they might die, organized alphabetically and cross-referenced by probability. Atmospheric combustion, atmospheric dissolution, atmospheric pressure variations, atmospheric toxicity, she chattered nervously. And those are just the A entries. Wait until we get to Z for zapped by unknown energy phenomena. As they approached the Sol system, their instruments began picking up signals that made absolutely no sense whatsoever. Instead of the expected radiation signatures of a dead world, they were detecting organized electromagnetic patterns, regular energy outputs, and something that their computer insisted on identifying as music, though no one could understand how sound waves could travel through the vacuum of space. "Captain," whispered Snorkelwhiff, his crystalline form casting nervous rainbows across the bridge, "I'm reading massive energy signatures from the planet's surface. Whatever's down there, it's not just alive, it's active." Flumpernickel stared at the blue and green marble growing larger on their view screen. It looked almost pleasant, which was obviously impossible because pleasant things didn't get classified as Class 15 Deathworlds. "Maybe," suggested Wobbleguts hopefully, "the creatures down there are already dead, and these are just automated systems running on residual power." Their hopes were immediately dashed when the ship's communications array crackled to life with an incoming transmission. A voice, speaking in what the universal translator identified as English, filled the bridge. "Unknown vessel. This is Houston Ground Control. You are entering restricted airspace. Please identify yourself and state your intentions." The crew stared at each other in absolute horror. Not only were the creatures of this death world still alive, but they had organized air traffic control. They're actually managing their atmospheric space," Flumpernickel whispered. "What kind of beings organize their deadly atmosphere into designated flight paths?" "The kind," Tiddlywinks replied with the tone of someone announcing the apocalypse, "that have been living here long enough to develop procedures." What happened next would go down in galactic history as either the most anticlimactic first contact ever recorded, or the most terrifying display of casual competence the universe had ever witnessed. Houston Ground Control, displaying the sort of professional patience usually reserved for dealing with lost tourists, guided the probably doomed to what they called a safe landing zone. The crew spent the entire descent convinced they were being lured into some elaborate death trap, possibly involving the planet's famously lethal weather patterns or carnivorous geology. Instead, they landed on a perfectly maintained strip of what appeared to be processed stone, surrounded by structures that looked suspiciously like they'd been built by beings who expected to use them for more than 5 minutes. "Captain!" Wobbleguts whispered, his transparent organs practically vibrating with terror. "There are vehicles moving around out there, organized vehicular movement patterns. They've got traffic." Through the viewport, they could see humans going about their daily business with the kind of casual indifference to mortal peril that defied all known laws of self-preservation. People were walking around outside, breathing the allegedly toxic atmosphere as if it were perfectly normal. Some were even doing it while talking on small communication devices, displaying the sort of multitasking ability that suggested these creatures had adapted to constant life-threatening situations. "They're not wearing protective suits," Snorkelwhiff observed, his crystalline form dim with shock. "They're just walking around in the open air, like it's safe. The landing bay doors opened, and a figure approached their ship. The crew huddled together, expecting to witness the newcomer's immediate and spectacular demise from atmospheric exposure. Instead, the human knocked politely on their hull. Knocked politely, as if deadly atmospheric contact was something you could do with courtesy. Captain Flumpernickel, displaying the sort of courage that was either heroic or monumentally stupid, activated the external communicator. "Greetings, brave creature. We are deeply sorry to witness your final moments. Your sacrifice in approaching our vessel will be remembered." There was a pause. Then the human replied, Hi there. I'm Dave Crankshaw from Immigration Services. Are you folks here for business or pleasure?" The crew exchanged looks of absolute bewilderment. Not only was this Dave Crankshaw still alive after prolonged atmospheric exposure, but he was conducting what appeared to be a routine administrative procedure. "You have Immigration Services?" Flumpernickel asked weakly. "Sure do. Been expecting you, actually. Got your flight plan about 20 minutes ago. First time visiting Earth? We were under the impression that visiting Earth was impossible." Dave chuckled, a sound that the crew's audio analysis equipment immediately flagged as indicating pleasure despite proximity to lethal environmental hazards. "Yeah, we get that a lot. Listen, I've got some forms for you to fill out, but the good news is we've streamlined the process. Should only take about 15 minutes, and then you'll be free to explore. Fair warning, though, it's a bit chilly today. Might want to bring jackets." "Chilly?" squeaked Wobbleguts. "You mean the atmospheric conditions are even more hostile than usual?" "Nah, just dropped down to about 58 degrees. Perfect weather for a barbecue, really, but some folks find it a bit cool." The crew stared at each other in growing horror. This human was discussing atmospheric temperature variations as if they were minor inconveniences rather than potentially lethal environmental fluctuations. "Mr. Crankshaw," Flumpernickel said carefully, "are you aware that your planet has been classified as a Class 15 Deathworld?" "A what now?" "A Class 15 Deathworld. The most dangerous planetary classification in our system. The kind of place where even the dirt has been known to file assault charges." Dave scratched his head thoughtfully. "Well, that seems a bit harsh. I mean, sure, we've got some weather, and yeah, Australia can be a bit intense, but most of the planet's pretty livable. My grandmother's been here 93 years and she's doing fine, plays tennis twice a week." "Your grandmother," Snorkelwhiff said faintly, "plays recreational physical activities on a death world?" "Well, she cheats a bit, uses one of those electric carts now. Bad hip." The revelation that humans had not only survived on Earth but had developed leisure activities, organized sports, and elderly individuals who engaged in competitive recreation while dealing with minor joint problems caused what medical experts would later classify as collective cognitive breakdown among the crew. "I think," whispered Tiddlywinks, "we may need to reconsider our understanding of what constitutes planetary hostility." Dave, meanwhile, was pulling out a clipboard with the cheerful efficiency of someone who processed interdimensional visitors every Tuesday. "So, what brings you folks to Earth? Tourism, business, family visit?" "We came here to document the final moments of our species before this planet killed us," Flumpernickel replied honestly. "Oh, that's nice. First time?" What followed was what anthropologists would later describe as the most educational tour in galactic history, though the crew of the Probably Doomed experienced it more as a systematic destruction of everything we thought we knew about survival. Dave's wife, Meredith Crankshaw, had volunteered to show them around town. Meredith was a cheerful woman in her 50s who taught something called elementary school, which apparently involved supervising dozens of young humans in a confined space for extended periods. When the crew learned this, Wobbleguts immediately assumed she was some form of highly trained combat specialist. "So, you're a warrior?" he asked respectfully. "Oh, heavens, no. I just teach 3rd grade. Though I suppose there are similarities," she laughed. leading them down what she called a sidewalk, a designated pathway that allowed humans to traverse their environment without protective vehicles. The crew followed nervously, expecting the ground to give way or the atmosphere to suddenly turn corrosive. Instead, they witnessed humans of various ages walking, jogging, and even riding small wheeled contraptions for what appeared to be recreational purposes. Those humans, Snorkelwhif pointed with a trembling crystal appendage, they're moving at excessive velocities while completely exposed to environmental hazards. Oh, you mean the joggers? Yeah, Bob there runs 6 miles every morning, says it helps with his cholesterol. He's deliberately exposing himself to cardiovascular stress while breathing unfiltered atmospheric gases. Well, when you put it like that, it does sound a bit dramatic, Meredith admitted. But Bob's doctor says it's good for him. The word doctor caused immediate confusion among the crew. In their experience, medical professionals were only necessary in extreme emergency situations or for treating injuries sustained in industrial accidents. You have medical specialists readily available? Tiddlywinks asked. Oh, sure. We've got 3 clinics just in this neighborhood. Dr. Peterson runs the one on 5th Street. Lovely man. Fixed my tennis elbow last month. You have a combat injury from recreational warfare? Meredith blinked. Tennis elbow. It's just from playing too much tennis. Repetitive motion injury. The concept that humans engaged in repetitive recreational activities to the point of minor injury, then sought medical treatment so they could continue the activity, caused Wobbleguts to make a sound like air escaping from a punctured balloon. Their tour continued to a local establishment Meredith called a coffee shop, where humans gathered to consume dark liquid stimulants while discussing daily affairs. The crew watched in fascination as people ordered drinks with names like double-shot espresso and hazelnut macchiato, beverages that sounded like chemical weapons but were apparently consumed for pleasure. That woman just ordered something called a triple venti pike place, Captain Flumpernickel observed. Is she attempting to build up immunity to toxic substances? Oh, that's just Janet. She works the night shift at the hospital, so she needs the caffeine boost. Hospital? Where we take care of sick and injured people. You have a dedicated facility for treating casualties? Several, actually. Memorial Hospital, St. Mary's, and the Children's Hospital downtown. The revelation that humans had not only survived long enough to establish permanent medical facilities, but had specialized them for different types of casualties and age groups, caused what their ship's computer classified as existential system failure among the crew. But the real breakdown came when Meredith suggested they visit the local elementary school. I thought you might like to see where I work, she said cheerfully. The kids would love to meet you. Kids? Flumpernickel asked weakly. Children. You know, small humans who haven't finished growing yet. The crew exchanged looks of pure horror. These humans were actually reproducing on this Deathworld. They were bringing new life into an environment so hostile that it had been marked as uninhabitable, and they were doing it intentionally. You deliberately create offspring in these conditions? Snorkelwhif managed to ask. Well, I wouldn't put it quite like that, but yes, we have children. Tommy Henderson in my class just turned 9 last week. Had a lovely birthday party in the park. In the park? You held a celebration for a juvenile human in an uncontrolled outdoor environment? It was beautiful. Sunny, about 75 degrees, perfect day for it. The kids played on the swings and ate cake. Or the image of small, vulnerable humans engaging in recreational activities while consuming processed sugar products in an exposed outdoor setting while celebrating the successful survival of one of their young for an entire 9 years on a planet that should have killed them all instantly was too much for the crew's collective sanity. I think, whispered Wobbleguts, his transparent organs now a fascinating shade of green, I need to lie down. Oh, are you feeling unwell? Meredith asked with genuine concern. There's a pharmacy right across the street. I'm sure they'd have something for an upset stomach. The casual mention that humans had established chemical dispensaries on street corners for treating minor ailments was the final straw. Tiddlywinks began laughing hysterically. Snorkelwhiff started refracting light in patterns that spelled out "impossible" in 17 different languages, and Captain Flumpernickel sat down on the sidewalk and began questioning everything he'd ever believed about the nature of existence. "Are you folks sure you're feeling all right?" Meredith asked. "Maybe we should head back. Dave's probably got the barbecue started by now." The mention of barbecue sent the crew into fresh waves of panic, as their universal translators identified it as controlled combustion for food preparation in outdoor environments. The idea that humans regularly set fires in their backyards for recreational cooking was almost too much to process. Back at Galactic Survey headquarters, Quibblethorpe Snodgrass was having what could only be described as the worst day of his 47-year career. The preliminary reports from the probably doomed had started arriving, and each transmission made less sense than the last. "Sir," he said to Grimbleshanks, his voice cracking like an adolescent Zephyrian going through puberty, "the crew is reporting that the humans have something called weather forecasting. They predict atmospheric disturbances in advance and then go outside anyway." Grimbleshanks had stopped oozing and had formed himself into what could only be described as a gelatinous question mark. "That's impossible. No species voluntarily exposes itself to predicted atmospheric violence." According to Lieutenant Bumblebottom's report, one human told him they were expecting scattered thunderstorms tomorrow and planned to have something called a picnic anyway. They described it as, "a little rain never hurt anybody." The silence that followed was so complete that several nearby filing cabinets stopped humming in sympathy. "A little rain never hurt anybody?" Grimbleshanks shrieked, his gelatinous form turning an alarming shade of purple. "Rain on a Class 15 Deathworld should be composed of concentrated acid that dissolves organic matter on contact." "That's what we thought, sir. But apparently Earth rain is just water falling from the sky, and humans consider it mildly inconvenient at worst." The reports kept coming, each one more devastating to their understanding of planetary classification than the last. Humans didn't just survive on Earth, they had developed something called civilization, which included concepts so alien to the galactic mindset that the translation computers kept crashing. They had restaurants where people gathered to consume potentially dangerous substances for pleasure. They had shopping malls where they acquired non-essential items in climate-controlled environments. They had movie theaters where they sat in darkened rooms watching projected images while consuming processed corn kernels and sugar water. But the report that finally broke Grimbleshanks came from Communications Officer Tiddlywinks. "Sir, the humans have informed us that they engage in something called extreme sports. Nidus, this includes deliberately throwing themselves out of perfectly functional aircraft while attached to fabric parachutes, hurling themselves down mountains on thin strips of wood, and something absolutely terrifying called free climbing, where they scale vertical rock faces using only their appendages. They do what for recreation? That's not the worst part, sir. They pay money to do these things. They have an entire industry built around deliberately engaging in life-threatening activities for entertainment." Grimbleshanks began to vibrate at a frequency that made nearby windows rattle. "Let me understand this correctly. We classified Earth as uninhabitable because it appeared too dangerous for life to exist. But not only do humans live there, they've made it safer by building cities and hospitals and weather prediction systems, and then they deliberately make it dangerous again by inventing recreational activities that simulate the original hazards we were trying to avoid." "That appears to be accurate, sir." "And they've been doing this for how long?" Quibblethorpe consulted his report with the expression of someone reading his own obituary. "According to their historical records, they've been engaged in organized civilization for approximately 12,000 years, with evidence of recreational dangerous activities dating back almost as far." The magnitude of the bureaucratic catastrophe was beginning to dawn on everyone present. For 43,000 years, the Galactic Survey Department had been marking Earth as "Do Not Approach," while an entire species had been living there, building cities, developing technology, creating art, establishing governments, and inventing increasingly creative ways to scare themselves for fun. "Sir," Quibblethorpe said quietly, "there's more." "More? How could there possibly be more? The humans have been trying to contact other life forms for decades. They've been sending radio signals into space, launching exploratory vehicles to other planets in their system, and actively searching for what they call extraterrestrial intelligence." "You mean—" "Yes, sir. While we've been avoiding them because we thought their planet would kill us, they've been looking for us because they were curious if anyone else was out here." Grimbleshanks made a sound like a balloon deflating, while simultaneously having an existential crisis. "So let me get this straight. We've spent 40,000 years in mortal terror of a planet full of beings who consider atmospheric acid rain a minor weather inconvenience, who deliberately jump out of aircraft for entertainment, who have survived long enough to develop interplanetary communication technology, and who have been actively trying to make friends with aliens this entire time. That's a remarkably concise summary of our situation, yes, sir. And our entire classification system, our safety protocols, our understanding of what constitutes a habitable planet, is apparently based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what constitutes normal living conditions." At that moment, every bureaucrat in the building felt a simultaneous urge to update their resumes. The collapse of the Galactic Survey Department's credibility happened faster than a neutron star's gravitational field could crush a birthday cake. Within 48 hours of the Earth reports going public, the department's communication channels were flooded with inquiries from other Deathworld planets demanding immediate reclassification. Planet Skullcrusher Prime, previously classified as absolutely lethal due to carnivorous vegetation, turned out to be inhabited by a peaceful species of photosynthetic beings who had named their plants Cuddles and Mr. Bitey and considered them beloved pets. The carnivorous plants, it seemed, only ate things that were already dead, making them essentially the universe's most efficient gardening tools. Planet Bloodfeast Omega, marked as uninhabitable due to toxic atmospheric composition, was home to the Gigglewumps, a species that breathed methane and considered oxygen to be roughly as dangerous as humans considered carbon monoxide. They'd been wondering for centuries why no one ever visited their lovely swamp planet with its delightful sulfurous atmosphere and perfectly reasonable acid rain. The Tremblequake system, classified as geologically unstable and prone to planet-destroying earthquakes, was actually inhabited by the bouncy folk, a species that had evolved to find seismic activity relaxing. They'd built their entire civilization around geological massage therapy and considered a good magnitude 7 tremor to be the equivalent of a spa day. As each reclassification request arrived, Grimbleshanks grew smaller and more translucent, until he resembled a puddle of anxious jelly rather than a functioning administrative entity. "Sir," Quibblethorpe reported, consulting a list that had grown longer than a Gortharian grocery receipt, "we're now receiving reclassification requests from 473 previously classified death worlds. Planet Venomfang has a tourism industry. The scorching desert of eternal doom apparently hosts an annual music festival, and the toxic swamps of perpetual misery have been renamed Happy Bubble Land by their inhabitants." "Stop!" Grimbleshanks wailed, his gelatinous form now roughly the size and consistency of a deflated balloon. "This is impossible. Our classification system was developed by the finest scientific minds in the galaxy. We spent millennia perfecting our safety protocols." "Actually, sir," Quibblethorpe said, consulting his historical records, "the original classification system was developed by a committee of beings who had never actually visited any of the planets they were classifying. They based their assessments entirely on remote sensor readings and a manual called How to Identify Dangerous Things Without Getting Close to Them, which was written by someone whose primary qualification was being really good at worrying about stuff. The sound Grimbleshanks made at this revelation could best be described as the cosmic equivalent of a whoopee cushion deflating in a cathedral. But the real chaos began when the humans, delighted to finally make contact with alien species, started sharing what they called helpful suggestions for improving galactic safety standards. Dr. Elizabeth Crankshaw, Meredith's sister, who happened to be a planetary geologist, had submitted a cheerful report titled Simple Techniques for Making Allegedly Deadly Planets More Habitable, which included such revolutionary concepts as wearing appropriate clothing for weather conditions, building structures designed to withstand local environmental factors, and not panicking when it rains. The report had been circulated throughout the galactic scientific community and had caused what historians would later record as the great rethinking of everything we thought we knew about planetary science. Meanwhile, Captain Flumpernickel and his crew had been invited to stay for what Dave Crankshaw called a proper Earth experience. This involved something called camping, where humans voluntarily left their protective structures to sleep outdoors in portable shelters while surrounded by the planet's allegedly lethal wildlife. "You want us to sleep outside?" Wobbleguts had asked, his transparent organs practically glowing with terror. "Sure. It's beautiful out here. Great weather for it too. Clear skies, mild temperature, just a light breeze. But what about the predators, the atmospheric hazards, the geological instabilities? Oh, you mean like bears? Nah, we're not in bear country. Worst thing you might see is a raccoon, and they're mostly just looking for snacks." The concept that Earth's deadly predators were primarily interested in acquiring processed food products rather than consuming visitors had required a complete recalibration of their threat assessment protocols. By the end of the week, the crew of the Probably Doomed had participated in activities that would have been classified as extreme survival training on any other planet. They had walked on beaches where they were exposed to unfiltered solar radiation, consumed beverages containing ice cubes made from unprocessed atmospheric precipitation, and attended something called a baseball game, where humans gathered in large groups to watch other humans attempt to strike a small spherical object with a wooden implement while consuming fermented grain products and processed meat tubes. The final straw came when Tiddlywinks discovered that humans had developed something called insurance, which was essentially a financial system based on calculating the statistical probability of various misfortunes and then paying small amounts of money to large organizations in exchange for protection against larger financial losses should those misfortunes occur. "They've monetized risk assessment," she reported back to headquarters. "They've turned the scientific evaluation of planetary hazards into a business model." It was at this point that the Galactic Survey Department officially disbanded itself, with most of its members taking early retirement to pursue careers in less stressful fields, like defusing antimatter bombs or mediating territorial disputes between sentient black holes. The humans, meanwhile, had started what they called a cultural exchange program, offering to teach other species their techniques for making the best of challenging situations and turning problems into opportunities. 6 months later, the galaxy had undergone what philosophers would later term the Great Recalibration of Reality. The former Galactic Survey Department building had been converted into something called the Institute for Applied Common Sense, run by a joint human-alien committee that specialized in what Dr. Elizabeth Crankshaw had dubbed practical planetary assessment. The new classification system was refreshingly simple. Instead of dramatic categories like Class 15 Deathworld, planets were now rated on a scale that included perfectly fine, a bit challenging, requires appropriate footwear, and maybe pack a lunch. Earth, in a twist that surprised absolutely no one except the former members of the survey department, had been reclassified as standard baseline for normal planetary conditions. Every other world in the galaxy was now measured against what humans considered just another Tuesday. This had led to some rather embarrassing revelations. The paradise planet of Fluffington Prime, previously considered the safest vacation destination in 3 sectors, was now classified as unnaturally boring. Lack of weather may cause existential crisis. Several luxury resort planets had been forced to install artificial weather systems and controlled wildlife encounters just to meet the new Earth standard requirements for basic environmental stimulation. Quibblethorpe Snodgrass, meanwhile, had found unexpected success as the galaxy's first planetary anxiety counselor. His office was perpetually booked, with beings seeking therapy for what psychologists had termed Earth syndrome, the condition that developed when you realize that creatures somewhere in the universe considered tornadoes a minor seasonal inconvenience, and sharks an amusing swimming companion. The humans have broken our fundamental understanding of what constitutes danger, complained Flibberty Gibbet Wuschenheimer, a former safety inspector from the cautious cluster. They have creatures in their oceans that can kill them in seconds, and they swim with them voluntarily. They have atmospheric phenomena that can level cities, and they've built an entire scientific discipline around predicting and studying them. They live on a planet where the ground occasionally moves, and they've turned earthquake monitoring into a routine government service. Quibblethorpe nodded sympathetically while making notes in his therapy journal. These sessions had become routine ever since the galaxy discovered that humans not only lived with natural disasters, but had developed entire academic fields devoted to understanding them, government agencies dedicated to preparing for them, and construction techniques specifically designed to survive them. The most traumatic revelation for many species had been learning about human entertainment. The discovery that humans had created fictional scenarios featuring even more dangerous situations than their daily lives, movies about alien invasions, natural disasters, and apocalyptic scenarios, had caused mass confusion throughout the galactic community. They imagine worse things than what they already live with, Flibberty Gibbet continued, and then they pay money to experience simulated versions of these imaginary terrors for entertainment. What kind of species develops recreational fear? The answer, as it turned out, was a species that had evolved on a planet where recreational fear was necessary training for dealing with actual environmental challenges. Humans had essentially turned survival skills into leisure activities, which explained why they found extreme sports relaxing and nature documentaries soothing. Captain Flumpernickel, who had returned from Earth with what his medical officer described as chronic perspective adjustment, had been appointed as the first director of realistic threat assessment. His job involved traveling to planets throughout the galaxy and explaining that most environmental challenges could be managed with proper preparation, appropriate technology, and what humans called a sensible attitude. The key insight, he would tell audiences of terrified planetary safety officers, is that humans don't see their environment as hostile. They see it as normal, and then they adapt accordingly. When it rains acid, they carry umbrellas. When the ground shakes, they build flexible buildings. When large predators threaten their settlements, they develop better fencing and wildlife management techniques. This practical approach had revolutionized galactic civilization. Planets that had been abandoned for millennia were being resettled using Earth-standard environmental management techniques. The former Deathworld of Grimfang Mordor was now home to a thriving agricultural colony that specialized in growing crops in acidic soil conditions. The volcanic hellscape of Doomington had become a popular destination for geothermal energy research. But perhaps the most significant change was the establishment of Human Standard Time, a universal measurement system based on how long it took humans to adapt to new environmental challenges. Most alien species measured adaptation periods in geological ages. Humans, it turned out, could adapt to almost anything in roughly 3 generations, which had become the new galactic standard for reasonable adjustment period. The Tremblenees of the outer spiral, who had previously considered relocating to a new planet, a process requiring several millennia of careful planning, had successfully established colonies on 17 different worlds using human-developed techniques, including something called just move there and figure it out as you go. As for Grimbleshanks Puddingworth, the former committee chair had found peace working as a consultant for the newly established Intergalactic Department of Reasonable Expectations. His expertise in bureaucratic anxiety had proved invaluable in helping other species transition from paralyzing terror of environmental variables to mild concern with appropriate preparation. The universe, it seemed, was a far less terrifying place once you realized that somewhere out there, beings were teaching their children to swim in waters containing creatures with multiple rows of teeth and calling it summer camp. And in a small office overlooking the spaceport where the probably doomed had first landed, Dave Crankshaw continued processing immigration applications with the same cheerful efficiency that had started it all, occasionally mentioning to new arrivals that Earth was having a particularly nice day. Only 3 minor earthquakes and a small hurricane off the coast. Perfect weather for a welcome barbecue.